Hi, I'm James Foley, the author-illustrator of Stellarphant, and today we're talking about the history of animals in space. Today we're going to answer some questions from readers. So Nemo asks, what was the first fish in space? Good question, Nemo. First fish in space was the mummichog fish, which went into space in 1973. Now, there were two juvenile mummichog fish, which are also called the Atlantic killifish. It's very fun to say, but also mummichog is quite amazing. Mummichog, mummichog. Mummichog fish went into space, two juveniles and a bunch of eggs. And the juvenile fish had never experienced weightlessness before because they were the first fish in space. And so they didn't know what to do. They didn't know which way was up or down or anything. They just spent the first couple of days swimming in loops, being very confused. But eventually they learnt to adapt and they did something very clever. What they did was they used a light that was above their tank inside the spacecraft to orient themselves. If they're on Earth, they know that up is where the sun is. So they did the same thing on the spacecraft that they were on, which was called Skylab. You may have heard of this before. So they knew that up was where the light was, and that's how they oriented themselves. Now, there were also some eggs. I mentioned this before. The eggs were developing during weightlessness. By the time they hatched, they knew exactly which way was up because they were using the light while they were still in the egg. So when they came out of those eggs, they weren't swimming around in loops. They just swam normally, as if they were on Earth. Very interesting little study there about how things might develop in eggs or in the womb if they're in zero or microgravity. Now, we've got one more question. Charlotte asks, what was the first spider in space? Good question, Charlotte. And coincidentally, was also on the same mission. 1973, the first spiders in space were also on Skylab 3, and their names were Arabella and Anita. And scientists wanted to study if they could spin webs in microgravity. Now, I'm saying microgravity because technically it's not zero gravity. When you're in low Earth orbit, there's still the tiniest bit of gravity, so we call it microgravity. All right, cool. But they didn't have too much trouble building webs after a couple of days. But at first, they had quite a bit of trouble. They weren't really sure what was going on, and their webs didn't quite look the same as they did on Earth. But after a while, they adapted too. Pretty much all the studies that we've done with animals in space have shown that after a couple of days, they all tend to adapt to microgravity, which is fascinating. Thanks for your questions. If you've got any more questions, pop them in the comments. That has been the true history of animals in space from my new book, Stellarphant.